We need to put some boundaries down.
Yeah.
Because I like to roam when I talk. That's all right. So, okay, thank you all again for having me back. I was trying to get my wife Adrian to come with me, but she's not feeling well tonight. But I told her that this is a really fun group. I'm going to come and talk with. So you guys are really laid back and a lot of fun to talk to. So, and in that vein, you know, I'm not your typical academic style speaker. If you have a question, you know, raise your hand or just ask it. So, in fact, I prefer you just ask it because I don't see well. So, we'll sit here like this for a while. You'll have to say, "Hey, Dr. Pagnac, you're stupid." You know? So yeah. So go ahead and just ask a question. So yeah. So today, I put this talk together several years ago, and it's a really fun one. Simply because I know as sort of archaeological oriented folks, you don't get the opportunity to name things a lot, name new types of critters. Paleontology, we do it all the time, probably too much. But classically, it has been, you know, Greek, Latin, that sort of thing, what we name things in. But, you know, within the past 50, 60 years, we've started branching out quite a bit into different languages. Things from Mongolia are named in Mongolian, things from, Japan, you know, things from Japan are named in Japanese, and we started getting a little creative. There's a trilobite species named Han, H-A-N, or trilobite genus named H-A-N. And so the first time someone found a new species of Han, they of course named it Solo. So we're getting a little more creative in how we do these things. And so this is a fun talk about some of the more prominent instances of using Native American names in nomenclature. So one of the things that got me fired up about this is I like to look at languages. I like to look at, well, I can see myself here. Okay, so I know I'm not afraid of stuff. I got a little roaming room. Okay, that's good. Okay, all right. So I like to look at language. We look at evolutionary development of organisms in paleontology by doing these things called cladograms, and branching evolutionary trees based on morphological or physical features of organisms. Well, linguists do the same thing, all right? But instead of using physical features, they use characteristic features of languages. And when I teach, phylogenetic systematics, or the building of these trees, we actually read a few papers about using these trees to examine languages and stuff. Languages evolve just like organisms do. They change over time. The way they evolve isn't quite the same. Organisms obviously respond to external stimuli and that sort of thing. Languages respond to sort of internal trends. But nonetheless, there's long-term change over time. And we can see that in our languages. And I take one of my favorite animals here, the English word horse. And so horse is derived from Old English or Old Norse hras. Right? And so with time, it has gone from Old English hras through Middle English through modern English horse, right? So this is a pretty interesting development. But what really gets interesting is when we look at the Latin word, Equus caballus. This is the genus and species name for a horse. Equus is pretty simple, all right? This is Latin for horse. And of course, from equus, we get the words equine, equestrian, all these sorts of things are pretty obvious, right? But this second word here, caballus, is actually really cool. So the best that I can assess, the best that I've been able to tell, is that in Latin, caballus meant nag. And these were the old horses that had been used in the army too much, that were a little sway-backed and just weren't really that useful anymore. So the word caballus meant an old sort of horse that was ready for the glue factory. Did they have glue factories in ancient world? But anyway, Jeff was ready for that sort of thing. But for some reason, caballus got in much more widespread usage, and this word has sort of injected itself into our language in many more ways than equus ever did. So for example, in Spanish, caballus was changed to caballo, and of course this is where we get caballero, so a horseman from medieval Spain. Move over to French, Cabalist became cheval. That's where we get chevalier, which was the old French word for a knight. And from chevalier, one who rides a horse, we get chivalry, cavalry, and cavalier. All right? So these words all develop over time. And so this is one of the things that I like about using these Greek and Latin roots to words and figuring out what these words mean when you're naming organisms. Right? You really have to figure out what these words sort of mean when you're naming organisms. And when you name a new critter, all you do is you come up with a descriptive term, you figure out what language you want to name it in, and then you come up with your best approximation of those words. Right? I've named a few things in my time. They've been woefully unimaginative. But you know, if I ever get the chance to name something again, I'll probably be a little more creative at this.
Have they all been Latin?
Juncture. They have been Greek and Latin. Yeah, everything I've done has been in Greek and Latin.
Try
Greek, actually. What's that?
Try Klingon.
Oh my God! Things have been named. They have been named in Klingon. There have been things named from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. There have been, you name it. So there have been things named after Elvis. Things, yeah, you can name it. So this brings us to this notion now that, you know, these words, that the names of these critters that have come from Latin and Greek, you know, are complex enough. And of course, we name them in Latin and Greek because those are the languages of scholars for however many, you know, hundreds of years. But as we've sort of moved into the 20th century, we've begun to realize that we should maybe be naming these things in some more of the native tongues to maybe give some respect and recognition to the people from where these fossils, these organisms came from. And as you'll see, in terms of Native American usage, South Dakota was one of the first places, or the first institutions to do this for Native American words. Right? So what I'm going to do is go over a few different examples of fossils that have been named using original Native American languages. So here's a map of some of the Native American dialects just in you know, from the Rio Grande North. As you can see, there's a ton of them. Right? There are a lot. And so what I'll be talking about here are some things that have been named in Siouan or Cataban up here. Let's see, there's going to be some Navajo. Let's see, it's going to be the brown. Some of you archaeologists may have to help me out. I don't know the names, I know the tribes, so the names of the language. And then there'll be some more down here in Central America that were named from Aztec languages, like, what's that, Navajo? Something like that. Yeah. So a couple of different things that have been named in these traditional languages. So we'll start with this thing right here, all right? Quetzalcoatl, all right? Quetzalcoatl is this Nahuatl word for feathered serpent. And it was a deity worshipped by these Mesoamerican cultures for a long time. Best we can tell was about 100 BCE to 1500 CE. And this is a very typical representation of Quetzalcoatl. It was the god of winds, merchants, crafts, artisans, and knowledge. And Quetzalcoatl is cool because its appearance transforms over time, as do, of course, many deity figures over time. They transform through time. Old school Quetzalcoatl was awesome. So, it was a feathered serpent that ate people, basically. But as time progressed, it became more, you know, anthropomorphized a little bit, but still remained this very, very ubiquitous god amongst many of these Mesoamerican cultures. But the big thing that remained was it was feathered. So it was feathered, and it was always derived from this notion of a feathered serpent that these Mesoamerican cultures represented. Well, let's fast forward a little bit to early 70s South Texas, all right? And there were some wonderful surveys going on at this time period. The early 70s was a big time in paleontology. The early 70s was when we were just starting to get into what today is called paleobiology. And so paleobiology is this notion, we're no longer looking at these animals as like fossils or the remains of, or partially lithified rock remains that just tell us about the presence of something. We're actually starting to examine these animals as living organisms. What would they do when they were alive? How did they move? How did they eat? How did they grow? This was when this was really, really starting to come into play. So we were starting to ask some really, really interesting questions at this time period. It was about this time period that this fellow named Doug Lawson, who was a UT Austin master's student under a paleontologist named Juan Langston Jr., he discovered this thing. And this is a giant upper arm bone, a humerus. This is the elbow right here, and this is the shoulder blade right here. And this huge thing right here is called the deltoid crest. We have a little bitty one right here, and it's where our deltoid muscle comes down and attaches here. It also joins up with your pectoral crest that comes over here. So this was an animal that was doing a lot of this type of thing, only it's huge, right? This humerus was that big. And he was discovering this in the late Cretaceous sediments that were about 68 million years old in Big Bend National Park, Texas. They were working in this thing called the Javelina Formation, which is really rocks at the very end of the age of dinosaurs. And so at the time, they figured out that this was a flying reptile. And this was the largest flying reptile that at this time was ever recorded. So they estimated, well, they had one wing, one complete wing of the thing. And you can still see it down at the Texas Memorial Museum in the Big Bend National Park down there. Total wingspan of this critter was probably about 50 feet. It was this huge, immense, ridiculously large flying reptile. And so here is some estimates of the size of this thing. But one of the things we realized was that it had a long neck. It had a very, very long neck. And one of the other things that was interesting is that we've only recently come to realize that dinosaurs had feathers. We've only really recently confirmed the existence of feathers in a lot of groups of dinosaurs in the last 20 years. But we've known for several decades that these flying reptiles had something akin to feathers. Now we know now that they're actually quite a bit different from the feathers we get from dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, of course, are ancestral to birds, so birds just inherited their feathers from dinosaurs. But pterosaurs had these other bits of fuzz and weird things that we call integumentary structures. But for a long time, we thought they were feathers. And so the neck of this animal looked like a serpent with feathers. And so what happened was we found this giant bird, or this, pterosaur, with an elongate neck that was probably feathered. So they said, let's name it after this Aztec serpent god, Quetzalcoatl. And so this thing became Quetzalcoatlus northropi. Wingspan was up to 52 feet. And we've now since found a slightly bigger specimen. This thing, Putzodoptera thumbina from Transylvania. Whether this thing is actually bigger than Quetzalcoatlus or not, kind of remains to be seen. It's tough to estimate the size of these things because when you just have an arm, you know, you got to kind of eyeball it. You got to eyeball the length of the arm, double that, and estimate the width of the chest and that sort of thing. So it's sometimes a guessing game. But we think that this thing from Transylvania is now bigger. But this was one of the first names from Native American culture that really came into very prominence, public awareness, was this thing, Quetzalcoatlus northropi, named after the feathered serpent god of the Mesoamerican peoples. All right, any questions about Quetzalcoatlus?
And they've known about.
What's that?
They've known about pterosaurs for a long time.
Oh, yeah. Our oldest pterosaurs were 150, 200 years older. We just have found nothing this big, this giant, this crazy guy. And big, you know, what do the big, giant, long-necked birds do today? They soar, they glide, and what do they eat? Carrion. Yeah, they eat carrion. Yeah. And so that's what we think this thing's probably doing too. When you eat carrion, you have to cover long distances. You have to cover long distances. And it's much more efficient to glide when you're covering long distances than it is to fly. So anytime we get something with pretty big wings, it's kind of an indication to us that this was probably a scavenger.
Tell me about the last part of the name there.
What? Northrop was named after someone in the aviation industry. Exactly. Yep. It was named after, and I can't remember, but it was named after. What's that? That's who it was. Yeah, yeah. He designed like airplanes or something. Yeah, it was named after him. I don't know if he was a if he funded the part of the expedition or something. I don't know. They named it after him. Yeah, this flying plane. And of course, the long neck is to reach into carcasses. Probably didn't have feathers on their heads, so they wouldn't get nasty stuff. Okay, so one of the most recent ones comes from Navajo myth. And when I was a kid, I read a lot of Native American folklore and that sort of thing. I read a lot of this stuff. And I read bits of this Dine Bahane, the Navajo creation myth. And it's really cool. The ancestral Navajo started way deep in the ground. And they ascend, up through 4 worlds. And they just begin settling in one world, and something happens. A monster chases them out, or one of their group, torques a deity off, so they have to run and do that sort of thing. But they descend through 4 worlds, and then they finally settled in the uppermost world. That is where they live today. And one of the first women in this 4th world, this world where they settled on the uppermost tier, gives birth to these hero twins. And these are their names. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce these because I have in the past, but it's been pretty ugly. So I just say, there they are. Navajo is an extremely complex language from what I've been told and what I can assess. But these 2 hero twins are very, very prominent in a certain portion of this Navajo creation myth. And their sort of exploits, their travels, they feature very, very prominently. So, one of the things that happens is the hero twins journey to find their father, the sun. So they go after, and I'm simplifying this myth a great deal because this is a paleontology talk, not a folklore talk. But it's all in there in their creation myth. So they journey to go find their father, the sun. Their mother tells them, your father is the sun. If you want to meet him, you gotta go find him. And so as they go find him, they have to encounter, among other things, these 4 trials that they have to get past. And this is a common theme from what I can see in a lot of Native American literature and a lot of folklore throughout the world. It's probably where a lot of video game themes come from. So you have to go and defeat or outsmart several different trials in order to get to your reward. And so they have to go through these crushing rocks, these slashing reeds, these shredding cacti, and then they have to go through these things called boiling sands that I believe are pronounced Setad. And Setad were kind of these living sand dunes. And the hero twins had to sort of navigate in and amongst these moving sand dunes that were very good at sort of consuming people and eating them alive, right, and keeping them from reaching the other side of the dune field. And so these sort of boiling, moving, kind of living sand dunes represented a major trial or hurdle for these hero twins to get over in the early folklore of the Navajo. So, jump ahead again to 2010, all right? There's an early Jurassic unit in Utah, Arizona, called the Navajo Sandstone. Anyone ever been to Grand Staircase Escalante or Arches or any of these places? any of these classic things that you see in the Southwest with these arches or these big giant cliffs are made from this Navajo sandstone. And this Navajo sandstone, it's like hundreds and hundreds of feet of vertical exposure, basically. At Grand Staircase Escalante, they blasted a tunnel through it. So when you drive from way down in the park up to the top of the canyon, you drive through a section of this, and it's just cut out. There's holes cut out in the side, and so you can get out of your car and walk over these holes and look, 800 feet down. Practically faint like I do when I encounter those things. But this unit was deposited in a big dune field that occupied central North America in the early Jurassic, about 200 to maybe 185 million years ago. So Western North America was this giant dune field similar to that we would find in the Sahara today. And so you have these gorgeous, wonderfully preserved dunes in these sediments. Well, these researchers named Serpents and Lowen in 2010 found this little dinosaur here. And it's what we call a prosauropod. Sauropods are these big, giant, long-necked dinosaurs that were plant eaters that lived primarily in North America in the late Jurassic, about 150, 145 million years ago. We find them in a unit called the Morrison Formation. If you go to Dinosaur National Monument, that's the Morrison Formation. I've worked in Morrison Formation quarry in the Black Hills up near Sundance for many years. So these things are pretty common. These things are the ancestors of these long-necked dinosaurs. They weren't very big at this point. We're talking, well, you can see kind of how big the front half of this thing is. So these things were only 6 to 8 feet long, maybe only that tall. They hadn't figured out how to get big yet, evolutionarily. And so they discovered this thing, and they found it in a sand dune deposit. And one of the things that they determined was that this thing had either been killed by, or after it died, was very rapidly buried by a flow in this sand dune, one of these sand dunes. And so this reminded them of these boiling sands, these living sands in the Navajo creation myth. So they named this thing Setad Russi. And Russ is this fellow who actually found the thing. Sertich and Lowen are the ones who published the paper. So again, they harken back to local folklore to give this thing a name, and it's forever going to be known as the dinosaur that died and was buried in a sand dune, which is not terribly common. We find dinosaurs buried in sand dunes in Utah and then over in Mongolia. That's really odd. It is very lizard-like, yeah, this big, long, lanky, like a thing. But you can see it's quadrupedal, goes about on all fours. Early dinosaurs weren't doing that. They were going about on 2 legs. It took them a while to come down to 4 legs. It's got the beginnings of a long neck here. So yeah, but this is indeed the ancestor to those huge, giant, long neck things that we see about 40, 50 million years later. Other questions about Setad? Okay, all right. Well, then we get to some really fun stuff. I told you all that one of the first uses of Native American nomenclature to name things was from here in South Dakota. And so it comes from fossils that were recovered from the Pine Ridge Reservation, particularly down here by Wounded Knee, Manderson, that sort of neck of the woods. And so the very first expeditions into the Pine Ridge Reservation were conducted by the American Museum of Natural History in 1906 and 1907. And to this day, these expeditions are still a little contentious because the American Museum folks at the time still had a pretty colonial mentality. Right? We get to go in and take what we want. And so they're still a little contentious. The fossils are still at the American Museum, but there's still a sort of point of pain for both the Ogallala Lakota tribe and actually the American Museum. Right? But nonetheless, this is where some of the first fossils came out of the Pine Ridge Reservation, was by these crews from the American Museum. And so they occurred in 1906 and 1907. This is an archival photo of the 1906 expedition, still relying, of course, on you know, teamsters and wagons and that sort of thing to get them in there. And these first expeditions were conducted by some pretty big names in paleontology: Albert Thompson, William Diller Matthew, and William K. Gregory. These are pretty big names that are known for mammalian paleontology of mammals. And so their goal was they wanted to locate fossils in this gap in the fossil record. And so we had some very, very good record. We had very, very good record of fossils from the White River Badlands, which now is Badlands National Park. And those fossils from Badlands National Park are approximately 38 million to maybe 27 million years old. And then the next unit above that, the next section of time above that, comes from down at Agate Springs. Who's been down to Agate Fossil Beds? Oh my word, go down to Agate Fossil Beds, it's amazing. So I've done work down there on many occasions, middle of nowhere, western Nebraska. It's one of the best places to do field work because you still cannot get a reliable cell phone signal. I go work at Agate, I am off the grid. It's wonderful. So, yep. But it's a great little national park unit down there. They have a wonderful visitor center. And so anyway, the fossils at Agate Springs are between 23 and 20 million years. So there's a gap in here from between maybe 27 to 23 million years ago. And the animals from the White River Badlands and those from Agate Springs are very, very different. So because we were missing some time between these deposits, these animals evolved, but we didn't get to see that evolution. And so all we see is this group of animals from the Badlands, this group from Agate Springs, and they're very different. We don't have that transition preserved. And so what these guys at the American Museum wanted to do was go and try and find some of the rocks that are the right age to preserve that transition. And so they figured that they might be able to find these down on Pine Ridge. And so they had excellent luck in the vicinity of Wounded Knee and Porcupine Creek. They found the right age of fossils or rocks, and not only did they find the right age of the rocks, they found a ton of fossils. And so I found some commentary about these expeditions in some of the old reports at the American Museum, and they're wonderful. So the reports that these guys wrote 100 years ago were so much more fun to read than the reports I write nowadays. So it says, the writer left New York June 4th, reaching Rapid City, South Dakota, June 9th, where a team, harness, tent, and provisions were purchased. On June 14th, Dr. W.D. Matthew of the American Museum of Natural History joined the party. On June 16th, we left Rapid City en route to Mr. Thompson's ranch on Springs Creek, South Dakota. I don't know if that's Springs Creek or Spring Creek, I'm not sure. Where a part of an outfit used in 1904 had been stored. Here we spent nearly 2 days in getting our outfit into shape for traveling, also employing a Mr. Hallisey as cook and teamster. Now being fully equipped for our purpose, we proceeded to our field of operation, which was only a distance of about 60 miles to the southeast. They write this very colorful paragraph about prepping for the trip, right? I write one sentence saying, prepped for 2 days, took so-and-so hours, that's why you paid me for that.
It probably took them about 4 days to make that 60 miles.
I'm sure it did, exactly, yeah. This picture is them headed out that 60 miles, right? Let's see, we traveled for 1 day through the famous Big Badlands of South Dakota, extending from the Cheyenne River on the north to the White River to the south, entering the Pine Ridge Reservation on the divide between the Cheyenne and White Rivers. We crossed the White River and followed up Wounded Knee Creek for a distance of about 20 miles where we made our first camp in the Miocene beds. So they kind of knew where they were going, and they've been following some of the reports of the geology of some of the folks who had come before them, right? On July 26th, Dr. Matthew returned to New York, which was a great loss to our party. Mr. W.K. Gregory of the American Museum of Natural History joined the party August 1st and remained until the close of the season, which would have been probably early to mid-September. Mr. Gregory proved to be a valuable assistant and a very agreeable companion, which anyone in the field knows is worth mentioning in any report. So you want to work with fun people who want to be there. If they're not fun and don't want to be there, it makes life miserable. So taking everything into consideration, the small party and the disagreeable weather toward the end of the season, I find it amazing that even 110 years ago, they were whining about the August weather. So, exactly. The expedition met with very good success. They really, really did. And they ended up publishing a great in American Museum publications in subsequent years. But this is my favorite part right here of the whole deal. Here's their budget, all right, for 1 year, all right. 3 months of field work for $1,300, all right. You know, I don't know if I could do a week of field work for $1,300 these days. So yeah, but I love what they spent it on. Traveling expenses, that was their train tickets, team and harness, all that stuff, provisions, feed, lumber, wood alcohol and hire the saddle horse, $210, cook and teamster, $30 a month. And then, you know, they got a little credit back for the sale of 2 horses at the end of the season. It'd be like, you know, selling our field vehicles at the end of the season. So, yep. And salary of Will and Diller Matthew. Will and Diller Matthew was a big deal, $200 for 2 months. So yeah, so I thought this was my favorite part of this whole report from Thompson 1906 was this budget, how things have changed. Yeah. I can honestly say that I don't take a big budget for my salary. I take a modest budget for my salary, just because I love being out there. But it's a lot more than $200. Yep. Okay, so this was the first batch of expeditions that went through Pine Ridge, and they found a whole number of fossils and went ahead and published some works on them through the American Museum over the subsequent years. But now we move to a little more local interest. Right? A number of South Dakota School of Mines and Technology expeditions were mounted by South Dakota School of Mines folks from 1953 to 1959. And they were led by John Reed McDonald, the curator of the Museum of Geology, from 1949 to 1957. So Reed McDonald was the first sort of major curator of the museum post James Bunk, who was one of the early curators in the museum. He sort of took the torch into kind of the mid 20th century, and he was here for 8 years, and then he got the job as the director of the Department of Paleontology at the LA County Museum, which is where he went and spent the rest of a good part of the rest of his career. Yep. But he was here at the School of Mines. And so he was urged by Bunk, James Dye Bunk, the museum director, to again go back and look at these same areas that the American Museum crews had. Because in subsequent years, we had done a heck of a lot of work in the White River Badlands. There were National Geographic expeditions out there. We had a very good handle on what was going on paleontologically out at the Badlands. Conversely, we also had a very good idea of what was going on in Agate Springs, down in western Nebraska. A number of major workers had contributed. No one had really paid attention to this stuff along the Oligocene-Miocene boundary in South Dakota from about 23 million years ago. So he was urged, go take a look for this stuff again. We have very good records from the American Museum crew. Go down and check this stuff out again. So he established what is still to this day known as the Wounded Knee local fauna. And in paleontology, we talk about things like faunas and local faunas. So a fauna just means an association of critters that lived in one spot that we sort of found as paleontologists. And if we call it a fauna, for example, we'd call it the White River fauna, That's a fauna from a pretty large geographic region, such as that encompasses Badlands National Park. If we call it a local fauna, that means that it's from a much, much more restricted geographic area, maybe 2 or 3 sites within an area of this block, maybe. And so he established this Wounded Knee local fauna based on the tons of critters that he found on his expeditions. And all these new taxa, he named in Lakota. So he named all these new critters in the traditional language of the Lakota. He worked with a family down on Pine Ridge called the Horn Clouds, who helped him with the translations. And so everything he named was in Lakota. And there's some wonderful, fantastic names of all kinds of different critters that he found down there.
It was pretty forward thinking in 1949.
Kind of was. And in fact, today's Tuesday, right? Yesterday, we had a group come up from Pine Ridge, and I was telling the students from Pine Ridge about these names. And of course, the question came up, you know, well, did you guys just come onto the res and take these? And I said, actually, no, we didn't. Reed McDonald was actually, for the time, very conscientious about working with the landowners, and then I think it was a very good political, cultural move to name these things in Lakota. So Reed McDonald was, you know, kind of a little forward thinking, you know, in this regard. He worked with landowners. He didn't just tromp in and take. You know, he was very, very concerned about this.
So where are these specimens?
They're still at the museum. Yeah, they're still, most of them are still here at the Museum of Geology. Yeah. Some of them have since gone to other collections, but they are still at the Museum of Geology. And we have regular consultations with the OST, the Oglala Sioux Tribe, to see if they have interest and they have the facilities to take them back themselves. As of now, they don't have the facilities. They simply don't have the facilities to take them back. But our collections manager, Sally Shelton, has been really, really diligent about involving the tribe in the collections management process, handling these specimens. So yes, indeed, they are still here, but we do keep the tribe apprised. And the 21st century mentality is whenever you want them back and you have a facility that is, you know, capable of storing them, they're yours. You can take them back. Other questions? Okay, here's a little map of what was going on. Here's the creeks that they sort of centered their work around, and we have a ton of localities basically in this neck of the woods right here. And so, what are some of the critters that we came across? There's a whole slug of them. So, Lipotyphla are insectivores and Erinaceids. These are hedgehogs. Right? So we had these great little spiny hedgehogs in abundance here in South Dakota about 23 million years ago. And this thing, these are some of the drawings, the original drawings of the fossils. Even through the 1960s and 70s, photography oftentimes just wasn't up to par to film these specimens, especially these very, very little specimens. There's no scale bar on here, but this specimen is probably about that big. And so even up into the 1970s, it was better to draw these things. It was better to have an artist do a scientific rendering of this thing rather than trying to take a picture of it, because photography just wasn't up to snuff yet. So this hedgehog is all called Oshigila Makpiahe. And Oshigila means little oddity, basically a little weird thing. All right? Quite unlike the other critters that we find at this time period. To have a hedgehog here is still a little strange. And then Makpiahe is Horncloud, and it's named after Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Horncloud, who again helped with this expedition. They were the main access points to the reservation. They helped Reed McDonald name the critters in Dakota, that sort of thing. And so this is one of the first ones that was named. Other fun ones. This is one of my favorite names in all of paleontology. Right? This name is crazy. Right? So This group Oomyida is basically a group of extinct lemur-like primates. And this thing here represents the last primate we have in North America. Primates were very common in North America. They first appear at the end of the age of dinosaurs, about 65 million years ago. And they extend all the way up until about 23 million years ago. And the big thing that did the primates in North America was the fact that from the end of the age of dinosaurs to about 23 million years ago, North America was very forested. It was very closed forest. But as time went on, the climate became cooler, the climate became drier, and these forests receded and conditions became more open. Well, many of these lemur-like primates like them some trees. They don't like to be out in the open. So we think that that's really what did a lot of these primates in North America. But this thing was the last known primate in North America, and it's Echinophochoscula phyllotow. Now, the Dakota obviously don't have a word for primates, because the Dakota were around 23 million years ago. They were around for a long time, but not 23 million years ago. So they have no indigenous word for primate. And so the story I've been told was that the first primates they encountered were with like traveling menageries or maybe even organ grinders coming west that would have a little marmoset or something on their shoulder. And so they named these things little catmen. That was their word for monkeys was, or for little primates was little catmen. So Echinophochoscula means little catman. And then phyllotow, this suffix right here, tau, is basically the Lakota for apostrophe S. And so Philo was Reed McDonald's, I think it was his eldest son who founded him. And so this was Philo's little catman in Dakota. This is a very important fossil. This is a type specimen. We have since found more of these. We may have found another tooth of Echinophochoscula on our surveys that we did out of Pagnac National Park this summer. We may have found another tooth of this thing. My graduate students are pretty stoked about it. I'm the cynical veteran, so I'm like, no, don't put the cart before the horse, you guys. Let's get an accurate idea on this thing.
Has this species all been found very local to that area, or do you get them like in Fall River County? Or
so we have gotten them from Badlands National Park, and then I'm trying to think if we've gotten them. I don't know if we've actually gotten them in western Nebraska. I don't think we've gotten them. Other examples have come from the John Day fossil beds out in Oregon. Those are equivalent age units, and so we have got another species of this thing out there. So it was, it was ubiquitous for this time period. Maybe not abundant, but it was there nationwide.
Have you estimated the size of this animal?
Yeah, lemur size. So this type specimen here is about yay big. So you're talking a little marmoset, lemur size thing. So, yeah, pretty small yet. Other questions? Okay, moving on to some other things. Beavers. Beavers during the Oligocene from about maybe 40 million all the way up to maybe 17 million years ago. Very, very prominent part of North American faunas. Lots of different kinds of beavers. And they weren't doing the same things that beavers do today. They weren't living in they weren't semi-aquatic, they weren't building their dams and that sort of thing. They were fossorial, they dug. And so they dug in the ground, and they dug these giant tubes that looked like corkscrews. And they're called daemonelix, they mean devil's corkscrew. And if you go down to agate fossil beds, you can see these things. But these little beavers about that big dug these like 6-foot corkscrew burrows. And so there are a number of different kinds of beavers that we find at this time period in North America. And they found a number of these. We find Chapatonka. Chapatonka means big beaver. Right? Chapa means beaver, Tonka is big. And yes, if any of you grew up with Tonka trucks, that was named after Dakota for big. Yep. So yeah, yep. So Chapatonka means big beaver, and Champiope is wounded knee. So this is the big beaver from Wounded Knee. And it is, in comparison to most of the beaver skulls from Wounded Knee are like this big, Chapatonka is like this big. It's about double the size of the beaver. Then we also have Chapachicula. Chica is little. I had a group of Dakota students in touring the museum years ago. This was like 10 years ago. And I blew their minds because they were telling me their names, and one of them said, I said, what's your name? He says, my name's Chica. And so your name means little. It's got real big. And I said, how do you know that? And I said, oh, let me tell you about the movie. So yeah, so now this is actually pretty regular fare for Lakota groups. They get really, really excited about hearing Lakota names. All right, so questions about these beavers?
How do they know it's little and not just not adult?
It's got all the adult teeth.
Okay.
It's got all the adult teeth. So it's got its wisdom teeth. They've come in. So, other questions? Okay. Lots and lots of rodents at this time period. Now, the fact that Reed McDonald found something this tiny, kangaroo rat, is pretty amazing. Because nowadays, if we want to find rodents in paleontology, we collect lots and lots of just dirt. We collect lots and lots of matrix. And then we screen wash them. We run it through sieves, and then we take the concentrate and put it under a microscope, and you pick through it grain by grain. Sand grain, ooh, mouse tooth. Sand grain, ooh, planet tooth. That's literally how you do it. They weren't doing that yet. This technique came about in the late 60s, early 70s. So the fact that they found some of these tiny little kangaroo rat tooth, these teeth are probably going to be a millimeter or two across. And then someone's nose was in the dirt. Someone's nose was right there in the dirt, which is how you got to find these things. And someone had a lot better eyesight than I do. But again, one of these kangaroo rats, they named Hitonkala, which means mouse. Other things. So this is a time period where we get a lot of dogs. And dog evolution is very interesting. 90% of dog evolution takes place right here in North America. And dogs appear in North America about 50 million years ago, and they do their thing here in North America until about 4 million years ago. And then at 4 million years ago, North America hooks up with South America, and they make their way down to South America. North America hooks up with Asia, they make their way over to Asia. And the group of modern dogs then did very well. They moved worldwide. However, at this time period, we were dealing with dogs that were only in North America. They were uniquely North American critters. And this particular thing here, this is it's this big one right here in this reconstruction. This is the jaw. Jaw's about this big. Big coyote, small wolf size. This thing's called Shunkahataka Pahinshindiwakpa. And Shunkahatanka means big tooth dog. And so I actually know several paleontologists who over the years have had dogs named Shunka. Named their dogs Shunka. And then Pahinshinte literally translates to something that sticks up on the tail. This is the Lakota convention for porcupine in Wakpa's Creek. So Shunkahatanka Pahinshindiwakpa is the big tooth dog from Porcupine Creek. And we have a lot of different dogs at this time period. We have dogs that are wolf-sized, coyote-sized, fox-sized, even these little tiny dogs that were kind of doing mink, ermine, fisher type things. Lots of different diversity of dogs. But this thing was probably one of the bigger ones. This was sort of the big coyote, small wolf. All right, and then finally this thing, all right? One of the weird things that happens in North America is cats are really weird. So cats, we say, live fast and die quick. From an evolutionary standpoint, different or specific types of cats don't last very long. They don't have a very long geologic range. Right? They appear, they do well, and then they go extinct. And then another cat comes in. They appear, they do well, they go extinct. 2 to 5 million years is about as long as we get for a cat, which is not very long by a lot of standards. And in addition to that, true cats that we know and love today don't appear in North America until about 17 million years ago. We get the first true cats in North America. However, back here in the Oligocene, we get this other group of things called nimrabids. And nimrabids are what we call false saber cats. They're this group that may be related to cats, may not. We still kind of haven't figured that out. But superficially, they look very, very similar to cats. They're their own separate, unique group. And many of them evolve these saber teeth. They have all these big, long saber-toothed teeth. Now, conventional wisdom with these saber teeth, with things like Smilodon from the Ice Age, tells us these were the big killing teeth that were used when Smilodon jumped on the back of a mammoth and like stabbed it in the neck or whatever. Yep. Wonderful fairy tales. Whenever I see a talk on Smilodon discussing these things, when the talk is over, I say, and they lived happily ever after. Because that's how fairy tales end. So, yeah. So conventional wisdom is these teeth were used to kill very, very big animals. The nimrabids with saber teeth from the White River group from the Oligocene 35 million years ago were bobcat-sized. What's a bobcat-sized animal need long saber-toothed teeth? So these things kind of throw what we know about saber-tooth pretty away. Despite what any paleontologist will tell you, we don't really have any idea what saber-tooth is used for. It could have been used from anything to bring you down prey, bigger than you, significantly bigger than you, to interspecific display. We really just don't know what they were doing. But this is a particular kind of one of these false saber cats called Echemoetepetecula. And you can draw over the echemo from the primate, and this thing means short-faced cat. So this is actually not a true cat, but again, very, very similar to cats to a bobcat. Think of a bobcat with maybe a cougar kind of tail, not the little short bobtail that they have today, and with some big saber teeth. That's what this thing was, right? And yet here's the jaw here, and you can see it has this big flange on its chin that helps support the teeth that came down, because the teeth on these things were very, very narrow and probably pretty prone to breakage. So yeah, so again, that's a number of the different critters that Reed McDonald named in Dakota. And there are a few others. There's a hippo-like animal named...
It has long, narrow teeth.
Yep. Could
it possibly have had a poison bite and it needed the teeth like a rattlesnake's teeth?
That'd be awesome. That'd be fantastic. But unfortunately, probably not, because there's no record of poison in any higher mammals. Right? The only mammal we know of that is poison is the platypus. Right? And its poison comes from spurs on its heels. So, and apparently it's pretty nasty. Right? But yeah, we don't know of poison. What's that?
What's the name of
This thing? Right here?
No.
Yeah.
The poisonous.
The platypus? Yeah.
Platypus.
Yeah, the platypus. That's the only mammal that really has a venom. The genus is Ornithorhynchus, which means bird nose. Other questions? Okay, so yeah, and that's one of the things that there are a lot more names out there that have been that have incorporated Native American languages. Is getting much more common these days, and that's again simply because paleontologists are starting to realize that a lot of the most fossil-rich deposits in the world, in North America and Canada, come from tribal lands, and so we want to try and be getting past this colonial mentality of go, grab it, and get out, right? We want to work with the tribes to a much more productive degree, and we do want to give credit where credit is due. And one small way that we can do that is by naming these things in some of the local languages. A lot of paleontologists think these names are kind of a pain in the butt. I love them, so I think they're fantastic. So I think they give things a little character. So that's what I have for you all tonight. And questions? Questions? Yes?
Well, when you asked about we had questions about the beaver.
Yeah?
Well, you said they had these tubes that went way down in the area.
Yep.
The beaver dug them. How do you know?
How do we know? Because we find this big old round corkscrew tube in the bottom living chamber there's a beaver skeleton. Yep. So we've actually found them in, down in the tubes. Because yeah, if we didn't find the beaver skeleton, we'd be like, well, this could be anything. It does. We literally found the beaver.
So absolutely cool.
Yep. Yep.
It's a great day trip.
It is. Well, and it's wonderful. Yeah. Yep. Highly recommended.
Then if you go down that far, there's like toadstools.
Toadstool, Scotts Bluff.
Yeah.
Fort Rob. Yeah.
Fort Rob.
Yeah. Western Nebraska is magic.
Stop off in Crawford.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. You can go to Carhenge down in Alliance, man. So, yeah, Western Nebraska is fantastic. Yep. An unrealized gem in this part of the world. Other questions?
No, but I can tell you that my cat is still living 35,000 years ago.
Really?
He's a year old, and the first thing he does is jump on your back and bite your neck.
Pretty much, yeah. That's how cats do it. Yep, that's how cats do it. When I give my lecture to my graduate students on mammalian carnivores, dogs, cats, bears, weasels, hyenas, and all that stuff, one of the main themes of that talk is, given the choice, you want to be killed by a single cat rather than a pack of dogs. Just because of how they do it. So cats are nice enough to kill you before they start eating. So that's one of the big themes in that lecture. Yeah, yeah. You can see the world. You could sit and see the world. Other questions? Okay, well, once again, you all, thank you so much for having me.